Little Big Planet, the ultra-customizable make-your-own platformer that gamers have been begging for since they've been gamers. Little Big Planet, the killer app that's going to yank the PS3 out of third place and draw post-Wii new gamers to the HD side. Little Big Planet, the only exclusive not featuring Solid Snake that would make me consider slapping down the money for Sony's Blu-ray player that incidentally also runs a couple games. Little Big Planet was a sales disappointment for Sony in its debut month. Oops. Okay. I know, it's as trend-whorishly fashionable to bag on Sony Computer Entertainment's shitty PS3 business model as it is to bag on Microsoft's red rings and Nintendo's greed, arrogance, holiday lineup, lack of third-party quality control. You get the idea. And it's entirely possible that the sales will pick up, during a recession, in an industry where the phrase long-term sales solidity doesn't exist unless your name is Smash Brothers or you come packaged with a fucking controller. But yeah, it could happen, sure, why not? This, of course, is one of those doom and gloom scenarios for gamers, right? So goes the logic, the continued mainstreaming of the hobby toward the twin evils of the jockocracy and the golden oldies could mean that more and more genuinely good gamers games sell poorer now than they would have before all the new kids turned up at the sandbox. We'd covered this, it's bad logic, but there you go. Still, it begs the question, what the fuck happened? Before we go any further, I think now is a good time to introduce anyone who needs the introduction to one of my favorite axioms, Sturgeon's Law, otherwise known as Sturgeon's Revelation. It's a turn of phrase named for its coiner, Theodore Sturgeon, a remarkably prolific science fiction writer highly popular in the 50s and 60s. What makes him awesome enough to be worth quoting? For one thing, he was responsible for writing Amok Time. For another thing, he was the author of a story called Killdozer. And it's about exactly what you think it's about. Awesome. Anyway, the story goes that in 1951, Sturgeon was at a conference at NYU where the question of whether or not science fiction deserved to be held as the equal of other literary genres was in debate, when a detractor raised as evidence the large amount of poorly written material visible in the sci-fi genre, or, as he put it, 90% of science fiction is crap. Sturgeon is said to have fired back, yeah, 90% of everything is crap. This has come to be known as Sturgeon's Law. So, basically, 90% of everything is basically worthless. 90% of food, 90% of books, 90% of movies, 90% of people. Actually, that's kind of lowballing it, I think, in regards to the people. And yes, 90% of video games. Negative outlook? Maybe, but it's also incredibly liberating. Life is much less disappointing, after all, when you approach every situation understanding that it's more likely to suck than not suck. When it comes to games, think of how much sheer flotsam is out there taking up space. With so many places for money to divide among, it's a wonder that any game becomes a singular mega-hit, let alone any good game. So that alone might help explain LBP's lackluster reception, at least compared to the hype. After all, this season has been a deluge of big-ticket games, many of which are more well-known as sequels to pre-existing franchises. But I think it might be something more than that this time. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I should reaffirm that I don't personally own a PS3 right now, and as such haven't played through the entire game nearly as much as I'd like to. So, if it's just that it eventually sucks, I'm not aware of that. I don't know, you tell me. No one has told me it sucks, but you know how it goes. It could be like Hancock and start out really novel and then turn into a bucket of dolphin piss in the third act. I just don't think that's the case. No, my theory is that the console market has become so starkly fractured and niche-driven that a game like Little Big Planet didn't have anywhere to go to truly fit, that Sackboy and his game were quite literally homeless. Once upon a time, every competing game console had a solid representation of all genres and styles as just a basic rule of business. Sure, there were instances where one team was better in certain respects. During the Sega-Nintendo wars, it was well understood that if your top genre was RPGs, you wanted an SNES, while if sports were more your bag, you went Genesis. And, of course, there's the specter of international niches, since, after all, while video games come from Japan, they certainly didn't stay there, and as such, there are whole genres and companies that are only solvent in certain territories. Dating sims are massive sellers in Japan, but the US and Europe have never cared. Microsoft, conversely, can't get the Japanese to buy Xboxes to save their lives. A simple matter of cultural xenophobia? Maybe. but it probably has more to do with perception. The Xbox is primarily seen as a delivery system for the first-person shooter, a genre that no one has ever been able to make Japanese gamers give a shit about. Although, psst, hey, Nintendo, want to be the ones to break that cycle? Let me make a suggestion. Think about it. But it's never been like it is now, where each major gaming platform, except of course for the DS, which just plays fucking everything, is now hugely committed to one or a small handful of niche audiences at the expense of the others. It's true, yes, that there is a contingent in gaming fandom of well-rounded, dedicated players who dabble in everything and experience the medium on a broad spectrum. It's also true that these gamers are, sadly, in the consumer minority, and as such it's even more true that none of the big three really cares what they think. Let's be real about this. Well-rounded, dedicated gamers, Nintendo doesn't give a fuck about you. Nintendo is laser-focused on the twin cash machines of late-blooming Generation NES diehards still sleeping under Zelda bedsheets, and now their moms. Microsoft doesn't care what you want either. They're aiming squarely at the sons of Master Chief. And Sony's machine is a Blu-ray player that incidentally also runs Metal Gear Solid 4. Each has its own core audience, and pity the poor game that comes along and tries to defy categorization. So then, look at Little Big Planet and ask yourself, where did this game belong? Its old-school side-scrolling engine, kid nostalgia-friendly Pixar meets the Muppets design style, and customization-heavy gimmick would at first glance make it an ideal candidate for the Wii, except its textures are HD-ready and it needs full-bore online play, neither of which is exactly Nintendo's specialty this time around. Plus, coming out this time of year, it just would have gotten swallowed up by Animal Crossing anyway. The PS3 had the HD covered with its 1080p capability, but Sony's grasp of online gaming is, well, Sony's grasp of online gaming. Not a promising start for a title whose long-term playability is tied inexorably to a fan community generating fresh content. The 360 has HD and the most robust online service, nearly a perfect fit, and maybe it could have been ported over to the PC where it could really stretch its legs. Except Microsoft has no presence in the Japanese market where user-created content framed around old-school 2D side-scrolling would be huge, and let's face it, the majority of the 360's target audience in the US and Europe will look at LBP's signature style and declare it gay. On balance, it probably wound up where it belonged, on the PS3, where at least the engine can achieve its true potential, even if Sony's half-assed venture into online play and consistently smaller user base will continue to hamper it for the foreseeable future. It's striking, isn't it? A game that would have had all the makings of a potential blockbuster in the business situations of the past is so far a mere cult hit today. And the thing is, I don't really know how we come back from this now. There's really no reason for Nintendo to not just keep right on polishing the classics and greenlighting minigame collections. There's no reason for Microsoft to not continue only hiring characters who primarily shop at Sports Authority or gun shows. There's no reason for Sony not to just let Blu-ray carry them and occasionally throw gamers a snake-shaped bone. It seems as though right now the only platform that actually wants to be open and available to every type of game and every type of gamer is the DS, which uncoincidentally tends to outsell everyone. But part of that is that it came in more or less able to rely on the old Game Boy's massive user base, and that it's comparatively easier and less expensive to develop for. The Wii could become the same thing to the console market, but right now its non-HD setup makes direct ports nearly impossible. That and designing for its unique control scheme has a heavy learning curve, and no matter how big your game is, you'll always end up competing with Mario's latest foray into whatever. That's an understandable, if not entirely defensible, hurdle for third-party developers to overcome, right? It says something that so far the only third-party designer of note to really hit designing for the Wii out of the park has been Suda51, and he's a fucking lunatic. So, I guess this one kinda ends on a plea. A wish for a Christmas miracle, even. Game designers? I'm talking to you now. You hear me? Geppetto, Hogfather, Sensei, Nutjob, vastly less interesting Nutjob, and the rest? This one's on you, fellas. Please don't give up on us. I know it sucks to see something you actually put work into sell less than, well, this or that. You get the point. But we're still here. We'll buy them as long as you're making them. And remember, Madden and the Mii's may get folks into gaming, but what you guys do keeps them gaming from years on end. Well, that was kind of a downer, huh? Let me see if I've got anything nifty to look at for you. At least. Oh, hey, well, fresh from the never thought I'd see that file, here's Ryu fighting the guy from Battle of the Planets in Capcom vs. Tatsunoko. Yeah. Anyway, just keep in mind, after all, even with all the hype for balance boards and minigames and Scarface worship, the single biggest selling game in the US and apparently most of the rest of the world in 2008 was basically a fan service orgy for hardcore old-school gamers. There's hope yet, even if it might come finally too late for poor little Sackboy.